The Joe Burrow era in Cincinnati has officially begun. We knew a week ago when he was drafted that he was going to be the guy, except now it's just officially official. Andy Dalton today released by the Cincinnati Bengals, so that means it's Joe Burrow's team, and oddly enough, he is backed up by Ryan Finley, who started a few games last year after the Bengals benched Dalton. And Finley was a guy a couple of years ago who, in the way too early mocks and all that, was a guy that was super highly thought of, and now he is going to be Joe Burrow's backup in Cincinnati. But it's official, so Andy Dalton is now out. And this was a completely obvious and foregone conclusion because Andy Dalton was owed $17.7 million on his contract, which is a stunning number. So he was obviously Cincinnati, which took time this offseason. They drafted Joe Burrow, but also spent a lot. Remember, that was kind of the big knock on Cincinnati, was they didn't spend money. Well, Cincinnati went out in free agency and spent $145 million in free agency this offseason, but they're clearing $41.6 million in cap space, and a big part of that, obviously, is clearing Dalton's $17.7 million. So he was a really good player for Cincinnati. I'm not going to say he was a great player, but he was a really good starter for 9 years. They made the playoffs 5 times. He's 32 years old. He became the starter as a rookie. He's the franchise's career leader in touchdown passes. He's second to Ken Anderson in career passing yards. But it's now time for a new era, and it's Joe Burrow's era. But there is going to be one question that people ask, and it's, what becomes of Andy Dalton? And you know what, as I started looking at this today, what really struck me, and that's not that this is a new thought that nobody else has come up with, but I was kind of examining it a little bit today. It is stunning, and in my opinion, completely unprecedented. I have yet to find another year in the history of the NFL where there were this many marquee quarterbacks that hit free agency, all in the same year. I mean, let's consider you had Tom Brady, 6-time Super Bowl champion, arguably the greatest quarterback of all time, certainly the greatest champion in the history of the NFL. He hits free agency and goes to Tampa. Phillip Rivers, 16 seasons in the NFL. He's thrown for 59,000 yards. He hits free agency. Now we see Andy Dalton hit free agency. 9 seasons, 5 times he goes to the playoffs. Cam Newton, 9 seasons in the NFL. He's won an MVP and gone to a Super Bowl. Jameis Winston, of course, hit free agency. Former number 1 overall pick. Threw for 5,000 yards this past season. The person who was taking a spot behind him, 2nd overall, Marcus Mariota, former number 2 pick in the draft. He hits free agency. Joe Flacco, who was a Super Bowl winner and a Super Bowl MVP, hits free agency this offseason as well. Blaine Gabbert, Blake Bortles, Mike Glennon, all first-round picks. Geno Smith, a former second-round pick, but guy who started in this league for 5 years, hit free agency. And, of course, Teddy Bridgewater, who's the guy who cashed in more than any other with the big $63 million contract from Carolina. Teddy, a former first-round draft pick and starter in Minnesota and in New Orleans, and of course, spent a brief moment with the Jets. He hit free agency. When you look at that, I'm looking at 12 quarterbacks. 12 quarterbacks that were either first-round draft picks or starting quarterbacks that were championship caliber. Guys like Tom Brady, of course, was a 6th-round pick. Andy Dalton was a 2nd-round pick. Geno Smith was a 2nd-round pick. But guys that started in this league, it is just an unprecedented game of musical chairs for the quarterback position in the history of the NFL. And clearly Joe Burrow is at the top of this now as he has taken over at the seat there in Cincinnati. He'll lead the Bengals officially. If you missed it earlier today, Jordan T-Bob, who've been having all the LSU assistant coaches on off the bench, like a different one each day, they had Bill Bush on the show. And Bill, of course, had a relationship with the Burrows, with Jimmy Burrow, which was kind of the open door. He coached Dan and Jimmy at Nebraska as well. So he kind of had the open door to the Burrows, and we've heard Ed Ogeron talk about the Joe Burrow recruiting stories, but it was interesting hearing Bill Bush today talk about recruiting Joe Burrow to LSU back in 2018.
The number one thing in the whole picture is that we were recruiting to LSU, and that was the number one thing, LSU football, and Coach O was just so receptive, had such a great plan for how to operate this whole procedure. It just happened to work out very fortunately that I'd coached Joe's brother at Nebraska, and I'd been friends with his dad, Jimmy, for 20 plus years. And so there was a lot of carryover there. Then I was with Joe at Ohio State for his freshman year. And so that's how the connection kind of came together. But the part that really came together was that we had a head coach and offensive coordinator and everybody that was so into the process, and that's what made everything work so well.
Really interesting stuff. You want to go check out that interview. By the way, check out the Cincinnati Bengals Twitter page as well. They have a fire, like literally, it starts with like lighting a match on a cigar as how the video starts. They have a fire video welcoming Joe Burrow to Cincinnati now on this day, of course, where Andy Dalton is out and Joe Burrow is formerly now the guy in Cincinnati. So go check out the Bengals Twitter page. You can see that video there if you haven't seen it yet.